Move to matters of public interest. Senator Back.
Thank you, Deputy President, and I congratulate you on your role now as Deputy President. And my contribution today actually continues the discussion that we've had in the last few minutes, Deputy President, and that is the question of the Renewable Energy Target review and whether or not there is indeed a sovereign risk associated with it. I say this because the wind energy industry, including Infigen Energy's Mr Miles George, has been claiming to one and all, and anyone who will listen to him, that indeed a sovereign risk may arise with the potential scaling back of the renewable energy target. I want to address that today. It's interesting that a review of the origins of the RET scheme provides a very clear view, Deputy President, that the renewable energies industry's position is, of course, self-serving, aiming to reinforce their own self-interest. As we all know, if you're at the races, through you to Senator Bullock, there's a horse called self-interest running. Senator Bullock, make sure you've got your money on it because you know it's trying. It's interesting that the wind industry is trumpeting two issues in the media. One is that wind power is dropping the wholesale price of electricity, and the second is that the RET will cause the retail price of electricity to fall. Well, simply, if wind is causing the wholesale price of electricity to fall, then it follows that the industry no longer requires subsidy through the RET scheme, as renewable energy is therefore cost competitive in the market. The RET is causing prices to rise significantly, and it relates, of course, to the power purchase agreement, an agreement in which prices are locked in at some $120 per megawatt hour, compared to the average wholesale price of $30 to $40, a factor of some 4 times. The price set by the PPA, therefore, is paid by retail or retailers irrespective of the wholesale price. The price is passed on, of course, as we know, to retail consumers. So let's go back to basics, Deputy President. The RET is a government intervention designed to mandate the proportion of electricity generated from selected sources. It was designed to support a policy of at least 20% of Australia's energy supply coming from renewables by 2020, and as such, of course, the policy taxes electricity users and, in some cases, non-renewable generators in order to subsidise selected renewable producers. From it emerges the renewable energy certificate market, where the RECs are issued to power station generated, classified as renewable under the Act. So in that way, as we know, the RECs have become a form of energy currency, as electricity retailers must purchase the RECs to cover their liability under the Act. These entities, generally electricity retailers, pass the cost of acquiring mandatory certificates onto energy consumers in the form of higher tariffs, and this then effectively becomes, of course, a tax on energy consumers. Well, the interesting exercise, Deputy President, is that after some 13 years, and this is what the coalition government is addressing, after some 13 years of operation, it's become clear that the objectives of the Act have not been reflected in outcomes. They have been, in fact, ineffective in the objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector. Indeed, according to the Centre for International Economic Report, their report of 2013, they generously indicated about 10% of total electricity generation from renewables, and indeed the Clean Energy Council in 2013 made the observation that the slight increase in renewable generation was actually greatest from hydroelectricity, not the other forms that have been so vocal. And of course we then turn to the RET review, which is underway at the moment, and we have some, including the Greens, claiming that this has been an attempt to render ineffective the Climate Change Authority's 2012 review. But of course we all know that it is a 2-year mandated review anyhow. Nothing unusual about that 2-year mandated. And again, mentioning Infigen Energy, it's interesting in their submission on their website to the current review, they're questioning whether there needs to be a 2-yearly review at all. So, Deputy President, we come to this figure of the 20% target by 2020. Is indeed it a percentage, or is it a number of gigawatt hours? When this discussion took place in the first place, it was believed that the figure of 20% due from renewables by 2020 would account for actually some 41,000 gigawatt hours. But as we know, in recent times, as a result of manufacturing moving offshore, as a result of other changes in the economy that have occurred, that figure of 41 gigawatt hours by 2020 is probably wrong, and more recent estimates, including indeed ACIL Allen's Consulting, in their presentation to the 2013 Electricity Users Association of Australia's conference, suggested that figure would not be around 41,000 gigs, but somewhere around about 23,000, a significantly lower figure. So the case to abolish the Renewable Energy Target is driven by its cost to electricity consumers compared to the corresponding reduction or lack of reduction in greenhouse gases. And we've got to do something before this gallops on to 2031, hurting families, individuals, residences, businesses and governments even more. I come to the question of sovereign risk then, Deputy President, and a key question, of course, is who owns the renewable energy certificates? Are they the property of the Commonwealth? By implementing the Act and establishing the RET tax, the Commonwealth created the renewable energy certificates, which are indeed a form of intangible regulatory property for trade by virtue of mandated national consumption levels, upon which, of course, all consumers pay an increase in their electricity prices. So we have a look at the provisions of the Act itself then, and we can see immediately what the various points of importance are as we look at this whole question of sovereign risk. At least in theory, firstly, Parliament may alter the law at any time, or vary or take away rights and obligations. The Parliament has that power within the precepts and concept of the Constitution. Secondly, the Act has a phasing clause which provides for periodic review of the RET, which we're undertaking at the moment, and that may result in changes to the scheme. We all know that, totally transparent, been there from the word go, everyone always knew about it. So these are prescribed by section 162, and they will make recommendations consistent with the objectives of the Act itself. Deputy President, the RET scheme was never intended to operate as an unchecked subsidy to the renewable energy providers, and it's high time they came to understand, recall and remember that. So it's most interesting then that we would have proponents questioning that a future statutory review of the RET ought to be undertaken every couple of years. The third point to be made, in the 2012 review, which was undertaken at that time, the issue of investor confidence was raised as an effort to promote the renewable energy investment. But of course, concern with investor confidence is not the same concept as sovereign risk. Indeed, it may be well acknowledged, as it was by the Climate Change Authority in 2012, that investor confidence has got to be balanced with other considerations, one of them being the cost to the consumer, the cost to families, the cost to business. And indeed, a wide range of views were expressed at that time. So if we look towards the review that's underway at the moment, Deputy President, what are the options? The first may be to leave the existing target unchanged at 41,000 gigawatt hours. The second may be to reduce that to what people are saying is the real 20% projected electricity supply demand, and that's the 23,000 that I have spoken about. This, of course, would reduce potential costs of the scheme, particularly for, like us, energy users and incumbent generators. The third option might indeed be to increase the target to promote a greater share of renewable energy more quickly, and particularly in the light of the CEFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, to make any renewable generation attributable to it and additional to that delivered by the RET, heaven forbid, and the fourth might be to repeal it altogether. So, in summary then, we would have a circumstance in which the reviews will probably result in changes to the rules of the RET scheme. I don't think anybody would be in any doubt about that, and should they occur, they will have an impact on the RET price. Now, the Coalition has been sending that signal very, very clearly for a long time. Nobody need be under any doubt or illusion as to where the coalition has stood on this and the contrast between the policies of the Australian Labor Party then in government. So the question becomes one of compensation for property acquired by the Commonwealth. And there's some interesting case laws, Georgiadis versus the Australian and Overseas Telecommunication Corporation. And that case, for those interested in it, seems to reinforce a view that statutory property interests cannot be assumed to be protected by Section 51(31) of the Constitution, because modification or extinguishment of such a right may not amount to an acquisition of property. A second one, the Commonwealth versus Tasmania in the Tasmanian Dam case, and the Mutual Pools and Staff Proprietary Limited versus the Commonwealth, is interesting because the authority there was the proposition that mere extinguishment or deprivation of rights in relation to property will not in and of itself amount to acquisition. Extinguishment or deprivation may not result in the question of acquisition. So the problem for the renewable energy industry, Mr Deputy President, is that in the case of renewable energy certificates, it would seem that the Commonwealth might not be acquiring property or even indeed extinguishing property. The outcome of the review may result in a decrease in the value of the RECs, as could be anticipated and probably is by those having a punt, but the RECs would not become worthless, Deputy President. They may be worth less, but not worthless. There is, of course, a significant distinction, and there is no argument for compensation on that basis. So what do then we define as sovereign risk? As we know, one common definition is any risk arising on the chances of a government failing to make debt repayments or indeed not honouring a loan agreement. And that's defined as a sovereign risk. But as a result of the global financial crisis, the International Monetary Fund in 2011 expanded the traditional definition of sovereign risk, broadly the probability that a country may not pay its debts, and it's, in their view, been shown to be too narrow. And developments subsequent to that have exposed very, very complex interactions between fiscal balances, public and private debt, and the financial sector. However, the IMF held discussions in 2012 around the definition of sovereign risk, suggesting that it might be extended, including the government's role in the resource sector and imposition of additional unanticipated or unforeseeable regulations on participants. So indeed we have a circumstance then, Deputy President, in which the outcome of the discussions being conducted do not extend to the understanding, as is being trumpeted by the renewable energy sector, and the reality for the renewable energy industry is that it may be very, very difficult for them, or indeed for anybody else, to argue the concept that sovereign risk in this case is a relevant basis for compensation. They will not be rendered, or may not be rendered worthless. They may in fact be rendered worth less. And finally, to add some international context for the position that I am advancing, in Europe, Deputy President, the renewables scheme is being modified, or indeed in many instances being scrapped, and there has been no claim as yet that I've been able to ascertain for sovereign risk claims being put forward by the industry. So I make this point again in conclusion, Deputy President. The wind industry can't have it both ways. On the one hand, they say that wind power, in this case, is decreasing or dropping the wholesale price of electricity, and secondly, that the RET will cause the retail price of electricity to fall. Well, indeed, if that is the case, there is no cause then for that particular aspect of the renewable energy industry to require further subsidy at all, since the renewable energy is cost competitive in the market. If indeed it's cost competitive in the market, let it live in the marketplace, but let it not be the reason, through their own self-service and their own self-interest, to see prices being unnecessarily driven up for domestic consumers, for residences, for small businesses and for large businesses.
Thank you, Senator Back.